Imagine a queen so powerful that even the greatest Roman rulers bowed before her. A woman so intelligent that she spoke more languages than the most educated scholars of her time. And a legend so mesmerizing that her name still echoes through history. This is the story of Cleopatra, Egypt's last and most enchanting queen. A tale of power, love, betrayal, and ultimate sacrifice. But who was she really? A brilliant ruler or a cunning manipulator? A goddess or just a woman fighting for survival? Stay with us as we uncover the truth behind Cleopatra's rise and fall, a story you'll never forget. The birth of a queen. The rise of Cleopatra. More than 2,000 years ago, in the heart of the ancient world, a child was born who would one day become one of history's most captivating and powerful rulers. In the grand and bustling city of Alexandria, the jewel of Egypt. Cleopatra VII entered the world as a princess of the mighty Ptolemaic dynasty. But she was no ordinary princess. From the very beginning, fate had woven an extraordinary destiny for her, one that would make her name echo through the ages. Unlike many rulers of her time, Cleopatra was not just defined by her royal bloodline or breathtaking beauty. She possessed a rare and remarkable gift, intelligence that surpassed many of her contemporaries. While others relied solely on advisors, she educated herself in a way that few monarchs ever did. She mastered philosophy, mathematics, and science, and she became fluent in multiple languages, allowing her to communicate with people from different nations without an interpreter. This skill alone set her apart as a queen who could command respect and admiration, not only in Egypt but across the vast and complex political landscape of the ancient world. Cleopatra grew up in a palace filled with treasures, surrounded by towering marble columns, golden artifacts, and vast libraries of knowledge. The Great Library of Alexandria, one of the most significant centers of learning in human history, was within her reach, and she took full advantage of it. She wasn't just a ruler who wore a crown, she was a scholar, a strategist, and a visionary leader. From a young age, she understood that true power lay not only in armies and wealth, but in wisdom, diplomacy, and the ability to connect with people on a personal level. Her world, however, was not a peaceful one. The Ptolemaic dynasty was filled with intrigue, betrayal, and internal conflicts. Even though she was born into royalty, her path to the throne was far from easy. She had to fight for her place, outsmarting enemies both within and beyond her kingdom. But she was not a queen who would bow to fate, she would shape it with her own hands. From the moment she ascended the throne, Cleopatra defied expectations. She refused to be a mere figurehead. She ruled with authority, wisdom, and unparalleled charm. She formed strategic alliances, most famously with Julius Caesar and later with Mark Antony, two of the most powerful men in Rome. But her relationships were not just political maneuvers. They were part of a much greater vision, the dream of restoring Egypt to its former glory and securing its independence from the growing might of Rome. Cleopatra's charisma was legendary. When she spoke, even the greatest of leaders listened. When she entered a room, all eyes turned to her, not just because of her appearance, but because of the undeniable presence she carried. She had the power to inspire loyalty, to turn enemies into allies, and to command respect from the most dominant empire of her time. But her reign was not without challenges. As much as she tried to secure Egypt's future, the tides of history were shifting. Rome was growing stronger, and the political landscape was becoming more treacherous. Cleopatra faced betrayals, wars, and ultimately, one of the most dramatic ends in history. Yet, even in death, she refused to be a pawn in someone else's game. She chose her fate on her own terms, ensuring that her legacy would endure far beyond her time. Today, Cleopatra is remembered not just as a queen, but as a symbol of intelligence, power, and resilience. Her life was a testament to the idea that true leadership is not about where you come from, but about the choices you make and the impact you leave behind. She was not just the last queen of Egypt, she was one of history's greatest legends. And that, dear listeners, is the story of Cleopatra, the queen who conquered hearts, minds, and history itself. The throne of Egypt. The rise of Cleopatra's power. At just 18 years old, Cleopatra found herself standing at the gateway of history, poised to take control of one of the greatest civilizations the world had ever known. Her father, Pharaoh Ptolemy XII, had passed away, leaving behind a kingdom rich in culture, knowledge, and wealth, but also one filled with political chaos and internal rivalries. As the rightful heir, Cleopatra was destined to take the throne. However, there was one major obstacle in her path. She was not the only ruler. According to Egyptian tradition and the laws of the Ptolemaic dynasty, Cleopatra was required to share the throne with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. At just 10 years old, he was too young to rule independently. Yet he was surrounded by powerful advisors who were determined to control Egypt through him. They saw Cleopatra as a threat, a woman who was far too intelligent, ambitious, and independent to be easily manipulated. But Cleopatra was not one to accept limits placed upon her. She had no intention of being a mere figurehead, nor would she allow herself to be overshadowed by a child and his scheming advisors. From the very beginning, Cleopatra showed she was different from previous rulers. While many queens before her had relied on their lineage or beauty to maintain their power, Cleopatra understood that true leadership required more than just a royal title. She was an exceptional strategist, a gifted orator, and a master of diplomacy. She spoke multiple languages, a skill that allowed her to communicate directly with foreign dignitaries and strengthen Egypt's position on the global stage. Most importantly, she knew how to inspire loyalty among her people, something her younger brother, controlled by his greedy guardians, could never achieve. Tensions between Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII escalated rapidly. Cleopatra refused to be sidelined, taking bold steps to govern Egypt on her own terms. She positioned herself as the true ruler in both policy and presence. She aligned herself with the Egyptian people, adopting their customs and presenting herself as the living embodiment of the goddess. Isis, a move that deepened her connection with the native population, who saw her as a protector of their land and traditions. This, however, enraged the powerful court advisors who backed her brother. They saw her independence as a direct threat to their influence, and soon, whispers of betrayal began to circulate through the royal palace. The situation reached a boiling point when Ptolemy XIII's advisors took drastic action. They declared Cleopatra an enemy of the state, stripped her of her royal title, and forced her into exile. Alone and betrayed, she fled to Syria, but she did not see this as a defeat. Instead, she viewed it as an opportunity, a chance to regroup, plan, and reclaim her throne. She was not a queen who would fade into obscurity. If she was to be exiled, she would return stronger than ever. While in exile, Cleopatra gathered an army, determined to take back what was rightfully hers. But she knew that sheer military strength alone would not be enough to overthrow her brother's powerful faction. She needed an ally, someone with the power and influence to shift the balance of power in her favor. And that's when fate led her to one of the most powerful men in the world, Julius Caesar. Cleopatra understood that winning the support of Rome was crucial. At the time, Rome was the dominant force in the Mediterranean, and securing an alliance with Caesar could change everything. But she could not simply walk into Alexandria and demand his help. She needed to be strategic, bold, and unforgettable. And so, in one of history's most daring and dramatic entrances, Cleopatra had herself secretly smuggled into Caesar's quarters, wrapped in a carpet or a linen sack, as some accounts suggest, and dramatically unveiled before the great Roman general. Caesar was instantly captivated, not just by Cleopatra's beauty, but by her intelligence, wit, and political brilliance. She spoke with confidence, laying out her vision for Egypt and explaining why an alliance with her would be beneficial to Rome. Cleopatra was not just pleading for help. She was offering Caesar something invaluably: strong, stable Egypt aligned with Rome's interests. Impressed by her boldness and charm, Caesar agreed to support her claim to the throne. With Caesar's backing, Cleopatra returned to Alexandria, ready to reclaim her birthright. The battle between her forces and those loyal to Ptolemy XIII was fierce, culminating in the infamous siege of Alexandria. In the end, Cleopatra emerged victorious. Her brother, realizing that his defeat was imminent, attempted to flee but drowned in the Nile, leaving Cleopatra as the undisputed ruler of Egypt. At last, she had secured her throne, not just through war but through strategy, intelligence, and unwavering determination. She was no longer a young queen struggling for power. She was a ruler who had proven her strength, a woman who had outmaneuvered her enemies, and a leader who was ready to shape Egypt's future. This was just the beginning of Cleopatra's legendary reign. She had conquered the greatest challenge of her life so far, but even greater trials lay ahead. Would she be able to keep Egypt strong and independent? Could she navigate the dangerous political landscape of Rome? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain: Cleopatra was not just another ruler. She was a queen like no other. The Great Escape, Cleopatra's daring path to power, betrayal, exile, a queen without a throne. This was the reality Cleopatra faced when her own brother, Ptolemy XIII, along with his cunning advisors, plotted against her. They saw her as a threat, too intelligent, too ambitious, and too independent to be controlled. They wanted Egypt under their grip, and for that, Cleopatra had to be eliminated. But Cleopatra was not just any ruler. She was a woman of extraordinary resilience, a strategist who knew that survival was not just about escaping, it was about returning stronger than ever. A queen on the run. Cleopatra's downfall was swift and ruthless. Her brother's advisors, envious of her growing power and influence, accused her of treason. She was forced to flee Alexandria, leaving behind her palace, her kingdom, and everything she had fought for. But this was not the end of her story, was merely the beginning of her greatest comeback. Unlike other fallen rulers who would have surrendered to despair, Cleopatra saw exile as an opportunity. She fled to Syria, a land of shifting alliances and powerful warlords, where she could regroup and plan her return. She knew that to reclaim Egypt, she needed more than just an army. She needed the backing of a superpower. And there was only one man in the world who could give her what she needed: Julius Caesar, the most powerful and feared leader of Rome. The power of Rome. At this time, Rome was the greatest force in the Mediterranean. Its legions were unmatched, and its influence stretched across continents. Caesar, the brilliant military general and politician, was at the height of his power. He had just emerged victorious from a brutal civil war against Pompey, solidifying his dominance over Rome. But his ambitions did not stop. There he sought total control, and Egypt was a crucial piece of the puzzle. Cleopatra knew that if she could win Caesar's support, She would not only reclaim her throne, but also secure Egypt's independence in a world dominated by Rome. However, there was a problem. Caesar was in Alexandria, inside a city controlled by her enemies. Reaching him would be nearly impossible, but Cleopatra was never one to back down from a challenge. A queen reborn. Cleopatra had not only survived exile, but she had returned stronger, more powerful, and more determined than ever. With Caesar by her side, she secured her position as the sole ruler of Egypt, marking the beginning of one of the most legendary reigns in history. But this was only the start. Cleopatra knew that her journey was far from over. She had won back her throne, but to secure Egypt's future, she had to navigate the dangerous world of Roman politics, outsmart rivals, and ensure that Egypt remained independent in an era where Rome swallowed entire nations. Would she succeed? Could she maintain her power in a world dominated by men? And what would her growing relationship with Caesar mean for the fate of Egypt? The story of Cleopatra was just beginning. She was not just a queen, she was a force of history, a legend that would live forever. The legendary meeting with Caesar, a moment that changed history. The fate of Egypt hung in the balance. Cleopatra, the rightful queen, had been exiled by her own brother, Ptolemy XIII, and his ruthless advisors. Alone and stripped of her throne, she faced a daunting challenge: how to reclaim her power in a world ruled by men and armies. But Cleopatra was no ordinary ruler. She was a master of strategy, diplomacy, and persuasion. She knew that her only hope of regaining the throne lay in securing the support of the most powerful man in the world, Julius Caesar. At that time, Caesar had arrived in Alexandria, supposedly as a neutral mediator in the conflict between Cleopatra and her brother. But Cleopatra knew better. Rome was not in Egypt for peace, it was there for control. If she wanted to win her kingdom back, she had to convince Caesar that she was the leader Egypt needed. But there was a problem. Alexandria was teeming with her enemies, and she had no way to meet Caesar without being captured and executed. That's when she devised a plan so daring, so audacious, that it would become one of the most legendary moments in history. The carpet trick. Cleopatra's bold entrance. It was the dead of night. The air in Alexandria was thick with tension, as the city's streets swarmed with soldiers loyal to Ptolemy XIII. Cleopatra, disguised in simple clothing, had secretly returned to the outskirts of the city, waiting for the right moment. She had with her a trusted servant, Apollodorus, a man of unwavering loyalty and strength. Together, they came up with a plan that could either save Cleopatra's life or seal her fate. Instead of trying to walk into the palace like a common diplomat where she would surely be arrested, she would sneak in, hidden inside a rolled-up carpet. The plan was as dangerous as it was brilliant. Late that night, Apollodorus carried the large, tightly rolled carpet with Cleopatra hidden inside. Through the dark, winding streets of Alexandria, every step was a risk. One wrong move, one suspicious glance from a guard, and Cleopatra's fate would be sealed. But fortune favored the bold. With incredible luck and Apollodorus's clever maneuvering, they reached the palace. The guards, unaware of the priceless cargo inside the rug, allowed them to pass. Apollodorus carried the carpet straight into Julius Caesar's private chambers. As Caesar sat, likely reviewing political matters, Apollodorus unrolled the carpet before him. And then, like a vision from legend, Cleopatra emerged. A queen unlike any other. The sight before Caesar was nothing short of mesmerizing. Cleopatra did not appear as a desperate exile or a weak woman pleading for help. She stood tall, her presence radiating confidence, intelligence, and charm. She had dressed carefully for this moment, wearing elegant yet regal attire, her dark eyes full of fire, and her voice carrying the authority of a queen who knew she was destined to rule. Caesar, the hardened military commander and shrewd politician, was stunned. He had met countless rulers in his time, kings, queens, senators, but none like Cleopatra. She was not just beautiful, she was captivating. She did not beg or plead. She presented herself as an equal, a partner, a ruler worthy of Rome's support. In flawless Greek, she spoke with wit and wisdom, outlining her case with unmatched eloquence. She did not simply ask for her throne back, she made Caesar see why Egypt needed her, why she was the true leader who could keep the kingdom stable and valuable to Rome. Cleopatra knew exactly how to appeal to Caesar's ambitions. She spoke of Egypt's wealth, its strategic position, and how, under her rule, it could become Rome's greatest ally. She did not offer herself as a submissive queen, but as a powerful ruler who could bring Egypt and Rome together in ways no other leader could. Caesar, a man who admired intelligence and strength, was immediately taken with her. Allies and lovers. That night, a powerful alliance was forged. Cleopatra had not only won Caesar's political support, she had won his heart. Historians debate whether their romance began immediately or grew over time. But one thing was certain: Caesar was deeply impressed by her. This was not just a political agreement. It was the beginning of a legendary partnership that would change the course of history. With Caesar's backing, Cleopatra was no longer an exiled queen. She had the power of Rome behind her, and together they would take back Egypt. But the battle was far from over. Ptolemy XIII and his forces would not give up without a fight. The city of Alexandria would soon become the stage for a brutal war, a struggle that would test Cleopatra's resilience, her cunning, and her ability to hold on to power. Would she triumph and become the undisputed ruler of Egypt, or would her enemies tear down everything she had fought for? This was just the beginning of Cleopatra's legendary reign. The return to power, Cleopatra's rise as Egypt's greatest queen. The sands of Egypt had witnessed countless battles, but none as decisive as the one that would restore Cleopatra VII to her rightful throne. With the most powerful man in the world, Julius Caesar, by her side, Cleopatra was no longer just a queen in exile. She was a force destined to reclaim her kingdom. Her brother, Ptolemy XIII, had underestimated her. He had thought that by exiling her, he had eliminated his greatest rival. But Cleopatra was not the kind of ruler to fade into obscurity. She had returned with not only intelligence and strategy, but also with the might of Rome behind her. The war for Egypt's throne had begun. The war for Egypt. Ptolemy XIII, though young, was not without allies. His advisors and generals knew that Cleopatra, backed by Caesar, was a threat they could not ignore. They prepared for battle, rallying the Egyptian army against the Roman forces stationed in Alexandria. The war was brutal. The streets of Alexandria turned into a battlefield, with soldiers clashing, ships burning in the harbor, and the city echoing with the cries of war. Caesar, an experienced military commander, led his legions with unmatched precision. But Ptolemy's forces had home advantage, knowing every alley and corner of the great city. For months, the war raged on. Cleopatra, though not leading armies on the battlefield, was deeply involved in strategy, ensuring that every move was calculated. She was not just a queen waiting for victory, she was a ruler shaping her own destiny. Then came the decisive battle. Ptolemy XIII, desperate to escape the advancing Roman and Egyptian forces, attempted to flee across the Nile River, but in a tragic twist of fate, he drowned in the waters that had once nourished his empire. With his death, the civil war came to an end. Cleopatra had won. The Queen of Egypt. With the war over, Cleopatra did not just reclaim her throne, she became the undisputed ruler of Egypt. No longer would she share power with a brother king. No longer would she be controlled by advisors and political games. She was now the sole ruler of one of the most powerful and wealthy kingdoms of the ancient world. But Cleopatra was not just a queen by title, she was a ruler in every sense of the word. She wasted no time in strengthening Egypt's economy, securing political alliances, and ensuring that her kingdom remained one of the most influential in the Mediterranean world. To solidify her rule and her legacy, she took a step that would shock and captivate the world. She gave birth to a son, Ptolemy XV, known as Caesarion, Little Caesar. The child was widely believed to be the son of Julius Caesar himself, the ruler of Rome. This was not just a birth, it was a political statement. Through Caesarion, Cleopatra had linked Egypt to Rome's most powerful leader, ensuring her influence over both empires. A queen like no other. With Caesarion in her arms and Egypt under her command, Cleopatra's power was at its peak. She was no longer just a ruler, she was a symbol of strength, intelligence, and ambition. She did not rule through fear or brute force like many kings of her time. Instead, she ruled with wisdom, strategy, and diplomacy. She understood economics, science, and culture, and she worked tirelessly to restore Egypt's prosperity. Under her reign, Egypt flourished. Trade routes expanded, wealth poured into the kingdom, and Alexandria became a center of knowledge and innovation. Scholars, artists, and scientists from around the world gathered in her court, making Egypt the shining jewel of the Mediterranean. But Cleopatra knew that power was never permanent. She had won her throne back with the help of Julius Caesar, but Rome's political world was unstable. Even as she celebrated her victory, she knew that new challenges were on the horizon. Would Rome continue to support her? What would happen if Caesar lost power? And how far was Cleopatra willing to go to protect her throne, her son, and her kingdom? The greatest queen of Egypt had reclaimed her throne, but her battle for survival was far from over. Love and Politics with Mark Antony, a romance that shook the ancient world. The death of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE sent shockwaves through Rome and beyond. The man who had helped Cleopatra reclaim her throne was gone, leaving behind a power struggle that threatened to consume the entire Roman Republic. As civil war erupted in Rome, Cleopatra knew she had to act. Egypt needed a strong ally, and she needed a new partner, someone powerful enough to secure her kingdom's future. That's when she turned her eyes to Mark Antony, one of Rome's most brilliant and ambitious generals. The meeting that changed history. Mark Antony was no ordinary man. A loyal friend of Caesar, he was a fearless warrior, a charismatic leader, and a man known for his passion for life, love, and power. Cleopatra, ever the master strategist, saw in him not just a lover, but a political partner who could help her achieve her grand vision, ruling the ancient world. In 41 BCE, Antony summoned Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus, a city in modern-day Turkey. But Cleopatra was no ordinary queen. She would not simply appear before a Roman general like any other ruler. She made an entrance that would never be forgotten. She arrived on a magnificent golden barge, its sails made of purple silk, the color of royalty. The scent of exotic perfumes filled the air, and Cleopatra, dressed as the goddess Aphrodite, the Greek equivalent of Venus, the goddess of love, reclined on a lavish couch. Musicians played soft melodies, and the scene was so breathtaking that Antony himself was left spellbound at that moment. Antony knew Cleopatra was unlike any woman he had ever met, a love that shaped empires. What began as a political alliance quickly turned into one of the most passionate and legendary romances in history. Cleopatra and Antony became inseparable. They dined together, laughed together, and ruled together. Unlike Rome, where women had limited influence, Cleopatra was a queen in her own right. She was his equal, his partner, his match in wit, ambition, and power. Together, they dreamed of uniting Rome and Egypt into a vast empire that stretched across the Mediterranean. They were not just lovers, they were co-rulers, warriors, and visionaries. Antony saw Cleopatra not just as a beautiful queen, but as a woman who understood politics, strategy, and the art of leadership better than most men. To further seal their union, Cleopatra gave birth to 3 of Antony's children. Alexander Helios, named after the sun god. Cleopatra, Selene, named after the moon goddess. Ptolemy. Their family symbolized the merging of Egyptian and Roman power, a dynasty that could one day rule both worlds. The challenge of Rome, but their love and ambition made them powerful enemies in Rome. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir, saw Antony and Cleopatra as a threat. He painted Cleopatra as a dangerous seductress who had bewitched Antony and turned him against Rome. Antony, once one of Rome's most respected generals, was now viewed as a traitor. The Roman Senate declared war on Cleopatra, not Antony, showing just how much Rome feared the Queen of Egypt. As the armies of Rome prepared for battle, Cleopatra and Antony stood together, ready to fight for their love, their children, and their vision of an empire that spanned the ancient world. Would their love conquer all? Or would the might of Rome prove too strong? The fate of Egypt, Rome, and history itself hung in the balance. The golden age of Cleopatra, Egypt's last and greatest queen. With Cleopatra and Mark Antony at the helm, Egypt entered a time of unparalleled prosperity, cultural brilliance, and political strength. It was an era where the Nile flowed with abundance. The markets of Alexandria bustled with traders from distant lands, and the people of Egypt looked upon their queen not just as a ruler, but as a goddess, a living embodiment of Isis, the protector and mother of the land. This was the golden age of Cleopatra, a period of power, splendor, and ambition, but storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. A queen like no other, Cleopatra was no ordinary monarch. Unlike many rulers who simply inherited power, she earned the love and loyalty of her people through her intelligence, leadership, and vision. While other queens remained behind palace walls, Cleopatra walked among her people. She spoke their language, understood their struggles, and ruled with both wisdom and strength. She revived Egypt's economy, improving trade and agriculture. The fields along the Nile overflowed with wheat, ensuring that no Egyptian went hungry. She expanded Alexandria's influence, turning it into the cultural and intellectual hub of the ancient world. The great library of Alexandria flourished, attracting scholars, philosophers, and scientists from across the Mediterranean. Under Cleopatra's rule, Egypt was not just surviving, it was thriving. A divine ruler, a living goddess. To the Egyptian people, Cleopatra was more than a queen, she was a deity. She aligned herself with Isis, the goddess of magic and motherhood, reinforcing the idea that she was Egypt's divine protector. This was not just a political move. It was a symbol of her deep connection to her land and her people. She didn't rule from the shadows. She stood at the forefront, appearing in elaborate ceremonies, dressed in glistening gold robes, adorned with precious jewels, and crowned with the royal headdress of the pharaohs. Her mere presence inspired awe, and her speeches stirred the hearts of thousands. For Cleopatra, power was not just about strategy and alliances, it was about being a symbol of hope, strength, and resilience for her kingdom, a love that strengthened a kingdom. Beside her stood Mark Antony, her lover, partner, and co-ruler. Unlike previous Roman rulers who sought to exploit Egypt, Antony saw the kingdom as an equal power. Together, Cleopatra and Antony dreamed of a vast empire, stretching from Egypt to Rome, ruled by their love, their lineage, and their shared ambition. Antony, now more Egyptian than Roman in spirit, adopted Egyptian customs, dressed in pharaonic attire, and even participated in Egyptian religious ceremonies. Their bond was not just personal, it was a fusion of two great civilizations. They ruled with vision and purpose, strengthening Egypt's military, enriching its economy, and creating a legacy that would be remembered for millennia. The shadow of Rome. But while Egypt prospered, Rome grew restless. To the Roman Senate, Cleopatra was a threat, a queen with too much influence, a woman with too much power. And to Octavian, Julius Caesar's heir, she was an obstacle to his own rise to supremacy. Octavian began a ruthless campaign of propaganda, portraying Cleopatra as a seductress who had bewitched Antony. Turning him against Rome, he claimed that Antony was no longer a Roman general, but a puppet of the Egyptian queen. The people of Rome, once Antony's supporters, now saw him as a traitor to his homeland. The tension boiled over into war, and the fate of Cleopatra, Antony, and Egypt hung in the balance. Would Cleopatra's golden age end in triumph or in tragedy? The battle for Egypt's future was about to begin. The war against Rome, a battle for survival. The winds of war had arrived, and the mighty Egyptian empire stood at the brink of destruction. Cleopatra and Mark Antony, once the most powerful rulers in the Mediterranean, now faced their greatest enemy, Rome's rising leader, Octavian. To the people of Egypt, Cleopatra was not just a queen. She was their protector, their goddess, their last hope. But to Rome, she was a dangerous rival, a queen who dared to challenge their power. As Octavian's legions advanced, the fate of Egypt hand, the legacy of Cleopatra hung in the balance, the rivalry that shook the ancient world. After the assassination of Julius Caesar, Rome plunged into chaos. Mark Antony, Cleopatra's ally and lover, controlled the eastern part of the empire. while Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, ruled the West. For years, they were uneasy allies. But as Antony's bond with Cleopatra grew stronger, Rome turned against him. Octavian launched a vicious propaganda campaign, calling Cleopatra a sorceress who had bewitched Antony, making him a traitor to Rome. The Roman Senate declared war not just on Antony, but on Cleopatra herself. It was no longer just a conflict between generals. It was a battle between two civilizations. The Queen of Egypt stood alone against the might of Rome. The Battle of Actium, the fight for an empire. In 31 BCE, the war reached its climax in the Battle of Actium, a massive naval confrontation off the coast of Greece. Cleopatra and Antony's combined forces faced off against Octavian's powerful Roman navy, led by the brilliant general Agrippa. The Egyptian fleet was strong, swift, and determined, but the Romans were strategic, disciplined, and relentless. The battle raged on, the clash of swords and fire-lit arrows filling the air. But soon, the tides turned against Cleopatra and Antony. The Romans cut off their supplies, and their forces grew weaker by the hour. Seeing that defeat was inevitable, Cleopatra made a fateful decision. She commanded her fleet to retreat and sailed back to Egypt. Seeing her ships leave, Antony, thinking she had abandoned him, was filled with despair. His forces collapsed, and the battle was lost. The final flight, a queen's last stand. Beaten but not broken, Cleopatra and Antony fled back to Alexandria, hoping to regroup and fight another day. But Octavian was relentless. He pursued them to Egypt, determined to end Cleopatra's reign once and for all. Inside her palace, Cleopatra knew the truth. The golden age of Egypt was crumbling before her eyes. But she was not a queen who surrendered easily. She had fought too hard, ruled too wisely, and dreamed too greatly to let her kingdom fall without a fight. Would she find a way to escape? Or would this be the end of Egypt's last great queen? The answer lay in her final, fateful choice. The tragic end, the death of a queen. The mighty city of Alexandria stood silent, its golden palaces now shadows of a fading empire. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, sat in her palace, watching the sun set over the Nile. She had fought bravely, loved passionately, and ruled wisely. But now, her kingdom had fallen. Rome was at her gates. Octavian's army had taken Egypt. The walls that had once protected her were no longer hers to command. The people who had once cheered her name now whispered in fear. Inside her chambers, Cleopatra knew the truth: her time was over. But one choice still remained. How would she be remembered? Would she live as a prisoner of Rome, paraded through the streets as a defeated queen? Or would she take control of her fate one last time?
The love that ended in tragedy. Cleopatra's heart was already broken. Her lover, Mark Antony, had fallen. Misled by false reports that Cleopatra was dead, Antony had plunged his sword into his own chest, choosing death over a life without her. But he was not gone yet. As he lay dying, Cleopatra's servants carried him to her palace. When she saw him, wounded, pale, and gasping for breath, she cried out in sorrow. Antony, with his final strength, whispered, "I die in your arms, my queen." And with that, he took his last breath. Cleopatra held him close, her tears falling onto his lifeless face. Her great love was gone, and now she would not be far behind. The queen's final choice. With Antony gone and Octavian closing in, Cleopatra understood her fate. Rome wanted her alive. Octavian, the ruler of Rome, wished to parade her through the streets as a war prize, a defeated queen chained and humiliated before the world. But Cleopatra was no ordinary queen. She had outwitted kings, ruled a great empire, and won the hearts of the most powerful men in history. she would not be a trophy for Rome. She made her decision. Death was her final act of defiance. She dressed in her royal robes, placed her golden crown upon her head, and sat upon her throne one last time. Then she called for a simple woven basket seemingly filled with fruit. Hidden inside was her silent assassin, a venomous asp, the sacred snake of Egypt. With steady hands, she reached inside, allowing the serpent to strike. Its fangs sank into her skin, and a slow poison began to spread through her veins. Cleopatra felt the sting, but she did not cry out. Instead, she smiled. For in that moment, she knew she had beaten Rome, the end of an era. When Octavian's soldiers arrived, it was too late. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, lay lifeless, her beauty undimmed, her pride unbroken. She had escaped Rome's grasp, choosing death on her own terms. Octavian, upon seeing her, sighed. Even in death, she had won. With Cleopatra's passing, Egypt was no longer free. The mighty kingdom of the pharaohs became a province of Rome, and the age of Egyptian rulers ended forever. But Cleopatra's name would never fade. Her story would live on, a queen of power, passion, and defiance, a woman who ruled with her heart and chose her own destiny. And so the legend of Cleopatra was born.
The legacy of Cleopatra, the queen who became immortal. The death of Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, was not just the end of a queen, it was the end of an era. With her passing, Egypt, the land of the mighty pyramids, the great Nile, and the gods of old, was no longer a free and powerful kingdom. It became a province of the Roman Empire, ruled by foreign hands. But though her kingdom was lost, Cleopatra's name was never forgotten. A queen beyond time. Throughout history, kings and queens have risen and fallen, their names fading into the sands of time. But Cleopatra's legend only grew stronger. She was not just another ruler, she was a force of nature, a woman of unmatched intelligence, charm, and power. She commanded the respect of emperors, warriors, and scholars alike. Her story is one of courage, ambition, and resilience, tale of a queen who stood against the greatest empire in the world, who won the hearts of two of Rome's most powerful men, and who, even in death, refused to be conquered. A master of strategy and influence, Cleopatra was far more than the enchanting beauty of legend. She was a political genius. She spoke multiple languages, making her one of the most educated rulers of her time. She was a skilled diplomat, forging alliances that shaped history. She ruled Egypt not as a figurehead, but as a true leader, restoring its economy, strengthening its military, and bringing an era of prosperity. Even as Rome sought to dominate the world, Cleopatra refused to be a mere pawn. She played the game of power on her own terms, bending the tides of history in her favor in her final moment. A love story for the ages. Her romances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were more than love stories. They were alliances of power. She did not simply fall in love. She chose partners who could help her achieve her ultimate goal, protecting Egypt. With Caesar, she secured Egypt's throne. With Antony, she built an empire that could stand against Rome. Their love was one of passion and strategy, a partnership that could have changed history. But fate had other plans. When Rome turned against them, Cleopatra and Antony's love became a tragedy, one that still moves hearts today. They fought together, they lost together, and in the end, they chose death over defeat. And that choice made their love immortal. The queen who defied Rome. Even in her final act, Cleopatra was unbreakable. Rome wanted her alive, humiliated, dragged through the streets as a symbol of Egypt's downfall. But Cleopatra would not be Rome's trophy. With the venom of an asp, she chose her own fate. She would die a queen, not a prisoner. Her death was not a surrender, was her last victory. And because of that, Cleopatra became more than a queen. She became a legend, the final thought, the eternal queen. What does Cleopatra's story teach us? It teaches us that power is not just about armies, it's about intelligence, influence, and determination. It shows us that history is shaped by those who dare to defy fate. And most of all, it reminds us that even the mightiest rulers must face destiny, but the greatest among them are never forgotten. Cleopatra did not just rule Egypt, she ruled history. And even today, more than 2,000 years later, her name still reigns. And so, Cleopatra, the queen who once ruled Egypt with unmatched brilliance, met her tragic end. But was she truly defeated? No, her story lives on, inspiring countless generations. She was more than a queen. She was a legend. Now, tell us, what do you think? Was Cleopatra a victim of history, or was she the master of her own fate? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you love epic tales of history, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. More fascinating stories are coming soon. Stay tuned.